Think of it as a big pond as opposed to a lake.
Welcome everyone to another exciting episode of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. Now, if you're hearing any ambient noises of some crackling or some loons, actually we haven't heard loons in a while, some geese, or just some rip-roaring farts or something, I'm not sure. We're sitting around a campfire having a good time, and we are on a nice little lake out in the back country with our friend Norm today. Say hi, Norm.
Hello, everybody. Andrew, Jesse.
Excellent. And as he alluded to, it's not just me, thank goodness. Jesse's also here.
Hello.
Sultry as ever. We have a cool episode today. We're going to be talking about, we're going to have some story time about our trip so far. We are, like I said, backcountry right now. But we're also going to be talking about what to do when you are fishing backcountry. Where do you spend your time on a back lake? Because we've talked before about, using different apps, but what about if it's not mapped at all and there is no information? We're going to get into that topic a bit later. If you hear those coyotes howling, don't worry, we're not dead yet. Maybe by the end of the episode, we may be. But we're going to start off, as we usually do in an episode, with an interesting fishing fact. And to handle that, we have our guest today, Norm. Hit us with the good stuff, Norm.
Thanks for having me on. It's kind of psyched being here with you guys. When I started listening to your podcast about 2 years ago, I said, I am going to go fishing with those guys. So here we are. I'm super excited. So Andrew had mentioned to me about doing the interesting fishing fact, and I said, I have to think about it. And then right away said, yes, I'll do it. Anyways, I said, can I do it about birds? And Andrew's like, okay. That's what we're going to do it on. Interesting fishing facts about birds. So I got a question for you guys. What would you say is some of the most common birds you see when you're fishing?
Osprey.
Cormorants. And I hate them.
Yeah, they're a nasty little bird, aren't they? Yeah, for sure. Kingfishers. It's another one that we see a lot of. How often have you seen bald eagles?
Well, we did see one today.
Yeah. It's a special occasion when we do get to see them. I've only seen them, I think, 3 times on a lake. Once was ice fishing. Once was on the East Coast, which that doesn't count because they're everywhere out there.
Yeah.
How about you, Jesse? How many times have you seen a bald eagle?
Not so common. We're around the areas that we generally fish. I have seen them a few times, but it is pretty rare.
Yeah. So I've seen them a few times myself, but as you guys know, a week ago, I came out to this spot because I wanted to find it. I knew we were coming in at night. I wanted to make sure that I was going to be able to find this spot so that we could actually enjoy ourselves for this trip. And as I was coming in here, I saw something. 2 eagles, 2 bald eagles, like literally in the tree just behind me right here. It was incredible. I've seen them a few times myself, but it just made me start thinking, like, what are some interesting facts about the bald eagle? Because I love eagles. I think they're very majestic. I really like them. So here's a couple of things that I found interesting. The first off is, why are they called bald eagles?
Because they take after my male pattern baldness on my head?
That could be a reason. Any idea, Jess?
I have no idea.
Well, interestingly enough, they're not bald. They have white heads, as you probably know. But the thing is, back in the day, you know how words always seem to change meaning? Like if you told somebody something's sick today, means it's pretty cool, right? But there was a time when sick meant sick. Well, back in the day, bald literally meant white-headed. So, bald eagles, as we know, have white heads, white tails, and dark bodies. And it's kind of interesting to note, as I was doing this research, they don't actually develop that white head until they're 4 years old. So when they're first hatched and they start getting their feathers as fledglings, they're brown. They're like very much brown. Once they're 4, they start developing their colors, and that is the color that they have.
So is the correct pronunciation of them when they're below 4 years old, before they have their white head, are they known as hairy eagles?
I don't know how to answer that. That's great.
Just don't and move on. That's fine.
So anyways, yeah. So I thought that was kind of interesting because you're thinking bald eagles. They're not bald, but that's the reason. The word bald used to mean white-headed. So that was one interesting fishing fact, I thought. Again, they don't turn color till they're 4. The other thing that I found, and this is something true of a lot of birds, they're monogamous. Don't know if you guys knew that, but I mean, we see that a lot in nature. They have a partner for life. And once they find that partner, they're always together. Prior to that, these birds are like on their own. They're flying everywhere and they're totally solo. But once they find that partner, they're together. And that's exactly what we saw when we came in a week ago. There was 2 eagles right in the tree behind us, and it was amazing to see. So yeah, another thing that I thought was quite interesting is the eagle itself, we would consider it to be a majestic bird. Would you not agree?
Sure.
So it was about this mid-1700s when the eagle started becoming something that people looked at as being majestic, as being a symbol of strength or help me out here, guys.
America?
What's another word? Sure, America. America. But yeah, no, it was like back then when that bird started becoming something impressive to people. It's interesting, Ben Franklin did not like the eagle. Any ideas why he might not have liked the eagle?
Because he himself was bald?
Oh, because it kept tearing up his kites.
Those are both probably true, but that's not the reason. The reason he didn't like the eagle, especially being a symbol for the USA or for America, was because the eagle is considered a thief. Eagle will have no problem taking food from other birds, and that's how they get a lot of their food. If you've seen any documentaries of the eagles themselves, they'll fight each other and take each other's food. So he thought that those birds were more thieves than anything else.
That's interesting. I guess I can call Jesse a dang eagle for taking that lure I had. No.
So take a guess at what bird he wanted to be the national symbol of the United States.
Is it something silly like a seagull?
Nope.
Turkey.
Bingo.
Oh!
He wanted the turkey. Could you imagine, like, how many times do you see that national emblem of that eagle? Can you imagine seeing a turkey there?
I just see like the American fighter jets, and on the side there's just like a bunch of turkeys painted on it.
Have you ever seen a turkey fly?
I have, actually, but I've seen them run far more often than fly because they're kind of like, they do it as a last resort.
Yeah, exactly. That's hilarious. So we're going to tie this into fishing because this is an interesting fishing fact. And so far, we haven't heard anything about fishing. So the other interesting thing is another name for a bald eagle. Any guesses? Very simple.
You're making it hard on us, Norm. I don't know.
The fishing bird.
A sea eagle, simply referred to as a sea eagle because they're always around water. And as Andrew mentioned, like the sea, it's just, they're kind of there all the time, aren't they? There's so many of them.
A seagull sounds like a less impressive beagle. It's like it got dropped down a grade. It's like, you're no longer bee, you're a seagull.
A sea eagle.
Actually, you know what's really funny? So I have a clip of the sound of an eagle because we've all heard eagles, so we thought, in the movies. They're very fierce sounding, aren't they? Do you guys want to hear what an eagle really sounds like?
Do your best impression, please.
Not going to happen. Can I play a clip that I have for you guys? So let me just get it here.
Squaw! For those astute listeners, that was Andrew.
Just going to turn the volume up here. Okay, so here's the sound of a bald eagle. So how fierce was that? It sounded like a seagull.
It sounded like someone polishing a floor, and the polishing machine just kept skipping on the floor.
It sounded like SpongeBob and Patrick swearing.
Those are sentence enhancers.
So yeah, I thought that was interesting. When I heard that clip, it literally sounded like a seagull to me. And again, a sea eagle, a seagull. Yeah, get it? Anyways, interesting.
Harder laughter.
Okay.
Okay, so here's my interesting fishing fact. What do you think an eagle is able to carry out of the water when it comes to them catching fish? What kind of weight?
I don't know. I've seen some pretty decent sized fish get pulled up.
Yeah.
I don't know. 8 pounds.
Okay, keep in mind the bald eagle has a wingspan of 8 feet on average. 8 feet, which is huge. Their body weight is on average, and don't ask me why they went from feet to like imperial to metric, but they're usually about around 4 or 5 kilograms for weight. So again, what are you thinking? You said 8 pounds?
Knowing that they struggle to get out of water, there's a lot of resistance for them to get back out of the water themselves. I would probably go a bit less, maybe like a 6-pound fish.
Possibly. What I found out was that question's kind of irrelevant because the bald eagle doesn't have to take the fish out of the water in order to get it and eat it. Any idea what they might do?
I don't know.
Throw it on the barbecue? I don't know.
Yeah, you would think so. They'll actually get a hold of the fish, even if it's bigger, and they'll get their claws into that fish and they will flop in the water and they will swim. They'll literally sit there with their wings.
I've seen videos of that.
Going like this.
Yes.
And they are swimming to shore.
They're like Michael Phelps.
Exactly.
Dense.
They're swimming to shore into shallow water where they can get that fish and start eating it. When I came here a week ago, that's exactly what I had saw. There was a muskie on the shore. I would say half the body was in the water, half the body was out of the water. And it was a pretty big muskie. I mean, considering what this lake has. And that was the only way I thought, like, I couldn't understand how they got that fish there. And that's exactly what they do. So whether or not they can catch a 15-pound fish or 8-pound fish is kind of irrelevant. Made me think of a fishing line and the pound test or the test poundage. Like, because you have 10-pound test, does that mean you can lift a 20-pound fish out of the water?
I say no.
Yeah, technically, but you can still land a 10 or a 20-pound fish, right? And that's exactly what these birds do. They don't have to pull it out of the water, so they can catch a bird much heavier, they can catch a fish much heavier than themselves and just drag it into shore by swimming. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's a fishing fact that is related to birds.
I always get offended when I see a bird catch a fish when I'm not catching them. So that is interesting, but it also makes me sad.
I just have one question for Norm then. You saw a muskie lying on the shore, and as a true outdoorsman, did you decide nothing can go to waste? And did you have a good, muskie feast?
Well, as you know, Andrew, I didn't. I literally took a picture and I put my hand down there for comparison and we let her go. It's actually still down there.
Yeah.
Just the skin. But that was amazing to see.
I can't confirm the carcass is there. Norm was good and did not start cleaning up a muskie, people. You don't need those hate mail letters. None of us ate muskie this trip.
You know what they call muskie? The forbidden meat.
Did you guys hear that?
Oh, there's something splashing
That
out
was
there.
a big splash. Yeah,
Could be the beavers.
Probably a beaver.
They decided to show up for the first time this trip, and now we've seen like 5 of them. That's excellent. That's a good fact about the eagles. They've actually been on a list of, I have on my phone, of different things that could be interesting fishing fact worthy. And I had eagles on there for a while, but I've never taken the time to do research on it. So that was cool to have someone else do it for me. But we're going to move ahead with our story time. I'm going to actually hand the microphone over to Jesse. We're really high class right now. I feel like the Flintstones, we have a microphone on a stick. And I'm going to pass the talking stick to Jesse.
And by stick, it's a literal stick that Andrew carved with his Bowie knife. Yeah, so I thought we could start this episode out. Again, we'd like to thank Norm for jumping on the podcast tonight. It's always kind of awkward because me and Andrew do this every single week. We have the ability to talk, me and Andrew, back and forth super fast all day long. Again, this is we're episode 83 at this point. Whenever we have a guest on and they're not used to being on the podcast, oftentimes they're a little bit nervous. And Norm was a little nervous, but how are you feeling now?
I'm glad that it's over.
It's not over. It just started, man. You're in big trouble.
Absolutely. This is the introduction to the podcast still. I'm not sure if you were aware of the layout, but...
Yeah, so anyway, I thought we could just do a little bit of we're talking about fishing backcountry lakes this episode. So I thought we could kind of talk about the trip that we're on right now. Again, we do these podcasts a few weeks ahead of schedule. So right now, as time of recording, what is it, the third weekend in October? I think. So. Something like that. This weekend, actually, for once, you may be surprised, no rain. Beautiful, 18 degrees in the middle of the day. Night a little bit chilly. Big super moon, full moon. Like, we have no lights on at the campsite right now, but it is very, very bright out here because of this huge, huge moon that we actually saw just come over the horizon. It was pretty cool. It's like a sunrise, but with a moon. Super cool. But anyway, I thought we could talk a little bit about a little bit of the process to get back into one of these back lakes. Now, me and Andrew go back country fishing a lot, but this one was a little bit different because it actually involved getting back here using ATVs, which is something that we don't own. So when Norm asked us if we wanted to fish this lake that he knew that had muskie in it, of course we said yes. But then we also said, how the heck are we going to get back there? Because it's really far. And he said, well, we have ATVs. So it was pretty cool. So we met up at Norm's house. We got all our stuff ready. I had the sports pal on top of my car. Norm had his car pulling a trailer with his ATV in the back. And basically, after driving, because we went after work on Friday, Andrew got off early.
Thank goodness, yeah. I was able to get off at good time because we knew we were going to be setting up at night by the time we got to the campsite. But I just didn't want to be the guy who's like, we're setting up at midnight and not like 7.
Yeah. So everything worked out good. We ended up getting to where we had to park to get onto the ATVs to go up the trail pretty late. It was pitch dark. Coyotes were howling. Norm and Andrew got everything ready. We picked up the second ATV. We loaded up Norm's trailer, and it was pretty cool because he has a trailer. What size of trailer is that, Norm?
8x6.
So it's a decent size.
No, 8x5.
Okay.
8x5.
Yeah. We put a lot of stuff on the bottom. We ended up putting the whole sports pal face up right on the back of the trailer and ratcheted it down. And then we filled that with gear. So the thing was loaded. So we had a really good, what was it, about 7-8 kilometers?
Yeah.
Down an ATV trail, which generally was pretty chill. There was a few big rocks we had to go around in some of the places.
Yep.
But it was pitch dark at night and pretty cold the first night. It was quite an adventure. For me, it was actually my first time on an ATV, but Andrew drove.
I have dabbled in the past. Again, I don't own one, but Norm trusts me enough for some reason to drive his quad. So it was fun. We took it easy coming in, especially at night.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me is fishing a lake like this, wherever we are, if you don't have an ATV, you're not fishing this lake. That's the deal. You can't get in here with a vehicle. You're not walking from the road. It's too far, especially if you had to like portage a canoe or something. Even if you had a heavy duty canoe cart, you're not going up this road. There's too many rocks and it's too far. So it's not for everyone. Not every lake that we fish, back lakes, are like this. This is just a really cool example of where we are this weekend. So as we're talking later in the episode about fishing back lakes, don't think you need an ATV. It is definitely cool to have, for sure. I wish I had one, but you don't need one. So anyway, we got to the site. We set up. Norm and Andrew sleeping in a tent with a heater. I'm freezing to death outside in my hammock. Thanks, guys.
We did offer that we could squeeze you in there if you wanted to, put 3 in this tent and a heater and maybe light things on fire. But Jesse said, no, let's be safe. I'll sleep in my hammock.
Also, 3 dudes in a tent. I'm good. I'm good, guys. Anyway, so it was quite an adventure. We've heard a bunch of coyotes. We've seen some beavers today. We're going to get into some of the fishing stuff. We did end up catching 3 muskie today.
We also, this morning, we actually saw the eagles that Norm was talking about, that he came here, again, last week to check it out. He saw those 2 eagles. We saw them up the lake this morning, with the fog rising and just flying out of trees and stuff. It was majestic, despite what Benjamin Franklin thinks. They were majestic.
So we're fishing this little back lake, and a lot of back lakes that we fish usually have very good fishing. And generally, when you're fishing a back lake, it's usually bass fishing, right?
Yeah, normally we'll come for bass opener or something like that. You put the effort in to go to a lake where you're going to have a good bass opener and not be crammed on a lake that's full of other boats. We like to be on our own when we're fishing oftentimes.
Yeah, for sure. So generally it's going to be, bass or sometimes walleye. We'll find a nice walleye back lake that's worth getting into, worth the effort going in. But if you ever hear back lake and muskie in the same sentence, that is a gem of a lake that you could not torture us to get the information out of as to where it is. Norm also said that he would bury us. So don't ask where this is. So anyway, we're fishing this small lake. This is a very small lake. In fact, me and Andrew have fished it thoroughly 3 times today with the trolling motor. So we get to this lake last night. We couldn't really check it out because it was pitch dark. But in the morning we got up. It was foggy. It was beautiful. Me and Andrew threw all of our gear into the boat. And Andrew, within 15 minutes, right on a major, he ended up catching.
It was a nice muskie, low 30s, beautiful spotted muskie. Oh, it was my first muskie on a rubber bait. So I was using the Waterwolf Ratzilla. And it's actually, I got it at CanCast this year and in the spring. And I was talking to Mike and I'm like, Mike, I want a bait. And he's like, do you have this one yet? And he picked it up. This is the color you want. I'm like, okay. I didn't know any better. I didn't have a better opinion than what Mike says. You just listen to what Mike says.
It's true. So if you're interested, it is the Ratzilla Junior, which is about 4 ounces. It's basically a bulldog, a pull pause bait, a rubber bait. And the color that you have, it's called hot whitefish. And it is very It's a high contrast white color with orange belly. It looks fantastic. And that fish slammed it. I was happy Andrew finally caught a fish on rubber because the bite on rubber is crazy.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts.
Yeah, so I was sitting here on the shore watching you guys fish in the fog, and it was like a beautiful scene. All I could see was a silhouette of Andrew standing at the front of the boat. Jesse's at the back controlling it like he normally does. And you kind of went out of sight. I couldn't even see you. But what I did hear was that muskie splashing and that jumping. And I knew that you got something. I wasn't sure if it was a muskie or a bass or something, but it was pretty awesome knowing that you guys got something anyways.
But you can be honest, Norm. You also heard me giggling like a little child, like
I did. I just wasn't going to bring that up. But anyways, it was incredible. I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Yeah, Norm has been fantastic this trip because actually, so Norm knows Radio Voice Royce. We've had him on the podcast before.
Good friend of mine. Yep.
And Norm is also very good at being like the camp curator. So, we get up.
I thought you were going to say something else, but
I was going to say camp wife, but
yeah, exactly.
Camp curator, I think, is a more apt description. We get up, Jesse and I, we get like, hey, he makes us coffee in the morning. We go leave him on shore and we go fishing. We catch a muskie that he can hear us having fun fishing. Meanwhile, he's out there cutting wood. We come back, there's a fire going, all this beautiful stuff. Norman's been looking after us. He made us steaks tonight. It's been great. So a big shout out to Norm for
It's honestly been like very enjoyable for me too. So thank you guys. We're going to do this yearly, right?
I would like to.
Sweet.
So speaking about just the day in general, again, third week of October, water temps, high 40s. In the morning we started, it was 47. By the end of the day, around 3 o'clock, the sun had warmed up a bit. It was about 51 degrees. So it's getting to that point where the fish are lethargic. They're a bit slower. Still active, and the releases, like when we released the fish, they shot off like a rocket. The fish are active, the bite window is just a lot smaller. We found that we did catch all 3 of the fish today on the majors and minors. We did end up seeing the 3 fish we caught, obviously we saw because we held them, and then we saw about 7 or 8 other fish. Some of those may have been the fish that we caught, so I don't know, but there was a good population of muskie in this lake. Most of the fish were generally high 20s to mid 30s length. There's probably a 40 in here. 40-inch fish. Not exactly sure. I would place a bet that there would be, but it is a very small lake, but very, very, very healthy population. All the muskie are pristine.
Yeah, I think we had one that had my first one had a little bit of a scarring, and by scarring, I mean there were a few scales that had popped off. That may have happened in the net. I have no clue. It was not beat up. None of them have been beat up. They're like virgin fish. They are beautiful.
They're like the opposite of Kawartha fish. But anyway, this lake, it's a little gem. Any day that I see a muskie is a good day. Any day that we both catch a muskie is a great day. So Andrew caught the first muskie. A little bit later, I was fishing a Royal Orba Junior. I had a fish smack it, rip the tail off almost, and then get off somehow. And then later that day, when we went back for lunch, we went back out. We went to the same spot, and I ended up smacking that fish. Again, I'm pretty sure it was the same fish, 36-inch. Not a huge muskie, but for this lake, pretty good size. And then on the way back, Andrew caught one on the baby beaver.
Yeah, the baby beaver was a cool bait. It's one that we wanted to get. We actually were able to pick it up at the Muskie Odyssey show this year. So that was cool to be able to use that one and actually, catch on it. I also, honorable mention, it bugs me. I'm still kicking myself. I missed a decent muskie, again, average what we've been catching. And it was the closest strike we had. This lake is extremely clear water. So figure 8ing to catch a muskie has not happened and probably won't, just because they become boat shy, because you can see for a while underwater. But this is about 15 feet away from the boat, and I was reeling in one of the Hashimoto 3-jointed baits in the pike pattern, and I had this decent muskie. The bait disappeared, but I was busy talking, and so I just thought I ticked a weed, and then I look over and I'd see the muskie spit it out as I'm trying to set the hook, and I'm kicking myself. And that's why it's so vitally important to always just pay attention when you're muskie fishing, because I wish I could have hit that fish and landed it on that bait.
Yeah, I saw the fish. I saw it basically just take off, and Andrew was like ripping his beard. But anyway, it was a great day. First day. We're going to fish tomorrow again. It was just a fantastic day. The majors, minors were right in the middle of the warm parts of the day, which was great. We had a full moon. It was like on the fish rating scale, it was like good plus or something. It was fantastic. We caught 3 muskie today. That was fantastic. We saw a lot more. We're going to try to catch at least 1 or 2 tomorrow. Norm and Andrew are going to go out, and I'm going to shoot the drone after them and get some shots of them. So I was going to ask Norm. So Norm has fished this lake before. What initially did you think? How did you think we would do at this lake? Again, as average anglers, we're not like muskie pros, but how did you think we were going to do on this lake?
Well, to be honest with you, like how you guys did today was honestly what I was expecting. Like I told you, I've been to this lake before. I know what the population seems to be in here. I've caught some muskie in here, and a lot of times it was midday. Can we time out? I have to pee.
Yeah, just go.
Okay, so I'll just answer your question. I actually thought you guys were going to do pretty good. I've been here a few times. I've seen the fish that have come out of here, the amount anyways. And I know, again, like you mentioned, there's a healthy population here. So I didn't tell you guys that you were going to do as good as I thought you would because I didn't want to jinx you, as it were. But I was quite happy with the results that you guys managed to pull off here. I would have loved to seen a few more. And I know that might sound a little bit hopeful, in a small lake like this. But I mean, I think it is possible in a lake like this.
We definitely missed a couple. Like I said, we saw a few, we raised a few more. So there definitely has been potential to perhaps have done better today. But again, I'm not disappointed with what we're able to pull off either. So yeah, we're excited to see what we can do tomorrow. We won't have the full day tomorrow because we are heading back out. Just a short little weekend trip for us. But yeah, it's going to be a nice morning and, into early afternoon perhaps tomorrow that we're going to hopefully get another one each, perhaps one for all 3 of us tomorrow. But we're going to go into our main topic now because that's kind of a good leave-in point for where we are so far in our trip. And we're actually going to be having a video kind of posted. Jesse's been working real hard on getting some good footage, getting some good B-roll, getting some awesome stuff, some instructional stuff kind of that we're shooting here. So we're going to have a video up as well on our YouTube to be able to showcase kind of what we did here. We're going to move on to our main topic now, which is what did we do when we got here to a lake we've never fished before? Where do we spend our time in a back lake? Now, we've talked before on the podcast about things like navionics, where if you look in a lake, you can find your depths. You can see, basically a topographical map of the underwater, and you see, I want to focus on here because here's deep water to shallow. I can see the river inlet is here, so the current's going to be coming this way. That's great. But when you come onto a lake like this, small back lakes, many times, if not all of the time, they are not charted. There is no maps online you can find about them unless you know a guy who's been there with his own, fish finder, his own sonar to be able to tell you what the depths are or give you an idea of where to go. All you have is you're sitting on the water and you're looking at the shoreline and you're looking at your own electronic device if you have one with you. So we're going to be talking about a few different techniques or tips that we like to use when we're on new water as to determine where we're going to focus our time. Now, we're kind of fortunate with this lake here. It's not very big, so we can fish pretty much we traveled the entire shoreline of this lake today. A couple times. We were able to eradicate some water. We know we're not going to come back to certain areas. But we traveled the whole lake once on the shoreline, and then we were able to search more in the middle of the lake to find some other spots, which is fantastic. But on lakes that may be a little bit larger, or if we didn't have the trolling motor and we were paddling by hand, I don't know if we would have put that much effort to go that far.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I know we're going to get into that. One essential tool, if you don't already own, is a fish finder. Now, I know we always call them fish finder. They're not they don't find fish, generally. A depth finder. And knowing the depth is a huge thing. We started off fishing the Garmin Striker 4, which is just the ice bundle. It's the cheap one that everyone has. They are fantastic. They do the job. You can use them as a flasher for ice fishing. You can use them in your boat. You can use them ice fishing. They're fantastic. And just knowing the depth easily tells you if you're wasting your time or not. So like if you're fishing in the middle of this particular lake, it maxes out at about 15 feet. So pretty much the whole lake is fishable for what we're fishing for. But some other back lakes, you'll go in the middle and it'll be like 90, 100 feet. But you don't know because the water might be tannic. You might think you're in 20 feet, but it's 90 feet of water. So having a fish finder or a depth finder is huge, and it helps you find areas that are going to be good to fish, or avoid areas that are going to be a big waste of time.
And that's the main point that's going to carry across no matter what time of year you are in a lake. You need to be able to get and start compiling information to be able to make decisions. That's just the basic part of it. We're going to focus on the 3 seasons of, fishing open water. So spring, summer, and fall. And we're going to go into a little bit kind of determining what areas you kind of focus on. So in the spring, after ice out, most species of fish, they come up shallow. Things like lake trout, walleye, pike, bass, whenever their season starts, usually oftentimes they're shallowest, or they're coming in shallower from the deep water they were staying in over winter. So if you're looking at a lake in the spring, you're going to want to be able to, again, find the depths where the fish are coming from deep water to the shallow water. Those transition points, wherever it's closest, wherever they can get with the shortest distance between those 2 areas, is primarily where you want to find and focus on to be able to have a better success. In the summer, you have hotter temperatures, so depending on the species that you're targeting, they may want colder water, which will be, things like large pike. They'll be often deeper. They won't be in the super shallow, skinny water. Small hammer handle pike obviously will be. But if you want to go for, your PB, you're going to have to be fishing some cooler water, or you're going for trout. They're going to be deep. Largemouth bass, though, they're going to be shallow. So you have to decide on what species you're targeting, if you're targeting multiple species, as to where you want to focus your efforts on the depths you're trying to find. Because if you're trying to find largemouth bass, for example, in the summer, there's probably not a whole lot of purpose to canoeing out into the middle of the lake to see what's the deepest point here. It doesn't matter. You're going to be fishing 4 feet of water against the shore. Again, with fall, things can change a fair bit, and it can change from lake to lake. Some fish will start coming in shallower. So those cold water fish, those larger pike, for example, walleye, they can start coming in shallower. The light's getting less and less. The water temperature is dropping, and so their preferred temperature may be right up close to shore. So again, you may be finding transitions where it's, drop-offs from shallow access to deep water access are going to be key areas. But even things like bass, where you used to find them shallow, all the weeds are dying. And we've talked about that on recent episodes. So we're kind of going over briefly these kind of rules of thumb to be able to determine what information you want to look for when you're on a lake. But we're going to get into how to identify it with and without electronics on what areas you want to target.
So if you've been fishing a long time, you probably know exactly where to fish. This podcast is more for people if you're just getting into fishing back lakes with no information. And maybe you're someone that likes camping. This is a great hobby to have. Back lake fishing it's an adventure. It's hiking, it's fishing, it's ATVing, it's everything together, and you're in the complete wilderness. But regardless of the season, just generally, if you get to a small lake like this that's in the backcountry, oftentimes you look in the lake and everything looks kind of the same. And you may wonder, where the heck do I start? So some of the places that may seem obvious, you may see, a big tree falling in the water. And obviously, even someone that doesn't fish probably knows that's a good spot to fish. But let's ask Norm right now, because Norm is quite an angler himself. If you're fishing a back lake, Norm, and say you just have a canoe maybe or a small aluminum boat, and you push it off and you're just getting out there and you start your motor, what are you looking for spots to start fishing? Like, what catches your eye?
That's a good question, and I totally was not expecting it, but I'll give you my opinion.
It's payback time.
Yeah, for sure. I would literally, assuming I have a canoe or some sort of mode of transportation, especially in a small lake like this, I personally would pretty much head right up the middle. And the reason I would do that is because it's going to give me a basic understanding of the structure of what's to my left, what's to my right. I would definitely be looking a lot in the water, trying to figure out depth, as you guys mentioned, is going to be very important. But for me, I'm going to make that trip and just kind of get an idea of what's around me. As was mentioned, fallen trees are like a good structure for holding fish. But again, different types or different times a year is going to make fish activity different. If we're fishing for pickerel or walleye, as some might call them.
As the right people call them.
Okay, well, that's debatable. But anyways, especially like early in the morning, later in the day, I'm going to target more shoreline because, as was mentioned, they don't like the light. They like that kind of twilight to darkness kind of thing. And at this time of year, that's what you get. So I would be personally targeting shorelines. When it comes to muskie and stuff like that, you guys do most of the muskie fishing. But again, for me, I would pretty much target like straight up and down the lake, especially on small back lakes.
Yeah, on a lake like this, I agree. Being able to find out, again, with no mapping previously, it can be helpful to know how deep the lake is. But being able to, because this lake is so small, again, this is a small back lake, to be able to go into the middle of it is only 100 yards out. So it's not like we're paddling across, the whole Kawarthas or something like that.
Yeah, actually, I mentioned to you when I was telling you about this place, I said, think of it as a big pond as opposed to a lake, because it's a big pond or a really tiny lake.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And seeing it now, you were bang on with that description. But being able to see, for example, you can be paddling along or motoring along, and you may notice that, I'm in 10 feet of water here in the middle of the lake. You keep going on, and all of a sudden, now it's down to, let's say, 40 or 50 feet. What that tells you is somewhere along the line, you're going to have, when you're in a deep spot, it may or may not be the deepest hole in the lake at 40, 50 feet, but at some point, it has to become shoreline. You can then start working your way from that deep section to find, it's very gradual. It slowly goes up from 50 feet all the way up to 10 feet or up to the shore. Whereas if I start heading right, it's staying at 40, 50 feet, maybe up to 30 feet, and then I'm 10 feet away from shore, and it's still 25 feet. There's your break line. There's a drop off. That's something you can determine. But also, in a lake like this, when you're in the middle, you can see the sides. So like Norm was saying, you can start looking to see if there's any shoreline structure from there, as well as you can kind of survey. You can almost sit in the middle of this lake and survey the whole thing. So that's a good idea for that, Norm. I would agree with that.
So here's a question for you guys that maybe somebody's wondering. When you map a lake, what is your pattern? Like you can, I don't imagine you can map a lake just by going right through the middle. How do you map the lake or the pond? Let's call it the pond.
On our unit, we have a Garmin Striker 7 or something like that. It has side scan and stuff like that. So when we are using, the quick draw map, which basically creates its own contour maps, it basically charts 50 feet on both sides of the boat, I'm pretty sure. So you're tracking about, I think, 50 to 100 feet, at a time. So what we generally do is, like, me and Andrew have been fishing a long time. We know where we're going to fish on a lake. If we're fishing a back lake that we've never fished before, again, sometimes we are portaging in, we're driving in through the lake, so we're already mapping before we even get to the site. This particular place, we got to the site, then we had to start mapping. But what we're going to do is we're just going to map as we're fishing and kind of look around. Like you said, we kind of went up the middle the first time. You can see the shoreline, you can see kind of what the shoreline is going to be like just by looking at it, but the rest of it, we're going to map as we're fishing. So we're going to be fishing spots that we like. Like Andrew said, the first day, or today, we went all the way to the other side and we noticed, hey, that whole top of the lake is like 2 feet deep with brown weeds and there's nothing there. There's not going to be a muskie in there. So instantly we know we're not going to fish that. So I'm not even going to bother mapping it. The rest of the time we're going through, and if we're fishing down, the middle of the lake because we're finding weed beds here and there, just visually seeing them, we can also see them on the fish finder. But even if you don't have a fish finder, you can just see those visually. But what I'm doing is I'm marking those weed beds on my GPS so that I know where they are. Now, as I'm mapping, I can also see the depth changes. So in the middle, it's 15 feet, but then we'll have some, more flat areas, or you can find some drop-off areas as well.
And just as a side point with that, of having the mapping, as we chart, it's showing depth only. It won't show us that we went over a weed bed before. It's showing us, you were in 15 feet, you're in 10 feet, you're in 12 feet, and it will draw contour lines on the map for you. So it essentially makes a topographical map using this system. But Jesse says when he starts pinning things, and even if you don't have a system that can chart for you, so if it doesn't, have the quick draw maps and it's not putting your contour lines out, they can be helpful. They are helpful. But if you see something, if you have even a regular GPS and you are, hey, all of a sudden I know I was in deep water and now I'm seeing some light colored water, there's some rock over there. You go on top of it, you drop a pin on your phone if you have signal, on your GPS, however you have, mark it so that, and you can label it, rock pile. Now you can go back to that spot, you know exactly where it is, and you can target that area. Same thing, we found a couple of weed beds here in the middle of the lake, and we've been able to pull some muskie off of them. So to be able to have the weed beds there, we go over top. Yes, it's showing us on the depth chart that it's, however many feet deep, but it's not saying, hey, here are your weed beds. So we have to pin those manually.
Yeah, exactly. So as we've kind of been talking, having a depth finder, even a basic one, is a huge deal on these back lakes. Because again, a lot of the lakes, like I'll give you an example. I fished this lake. It wasn't necessarily a back lake, but it was a provincial park that you couldn't really tell how deep it was. And I remember for years I'd go out there in my kayak and I never knew how deep it was in some of the small areas. I'd be like, oh, it's got to be 25 feet here. And then when I eventually got a unit, I was like, it's only 12, because the water's so tannic. You'd never know the depth unless you let line down and actually figured it out. So it is handy to have even a small unit, a fish finding unit, that is.
Yeah, I thought that was a great point that you just mentioned. I thought it was hilarious because I know the spot you're talking about, and I just always assumed it was like at least 30 feet deep. And then you told me that you mapped it, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. So, but you're right. Like you cannot tell because of the water clarity how deep it is.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
And again, that information can help you from wasting your time. Andrew kind of went through some of the different seasons as where you can find fish. Again, we have so many podcasts with especially a lot of guests. Like if it's fall now, I mean, it's pretty much, it's November by the time this one comes out. That period of time, it is hard to catch fish. But we do have podcasts with a lot of guests covering, an ice fishing expert, spring, summer, fall. You can look back through our podcast and check out some of the episodes where maybe you're fishing a back lake in the summer and you're like, I don't know where to catch bass. We have a podcast about that. Easy. In the fall, we have a podcast about that. So definitely, again, we're up to 82 podcasts now. Scroll back if you haven't listened to every single one, or if you need a refresher, scroll back and I'm 100% sure you'll find something that will be helpful for you.
And moving on to something that, let's say you don't have electronics. How do you identify what you want to fish for? When we first arrived at this lake, for example, the side that we're camping right on the lakeshore, and I could look into the water, and it's not a drop-off. I can cast out, I can see the bottom. Again, very clear water. I could see bottom, going out 30 feet from shore, and I can still see the bottom. Yes, it's clear water, we confirmed it later on, it's less than 7 feet in front of our site, about a casting distance range. But from the other side of the lake, I was seeing Canadian shield, the big rocks. And those big rocks is like a short little cliff face, and you're not seeing a giant cliff that you'd want to do like rock climbing on or something like that. It's not skyscraping 90 feet out of the water, but I'm seeing vertical rock directly on the water's edge. It's not sloping in; it's directly vertical. So I was telling Jesse, the first thing I want to do is I want to head out to the middle, and I want to start heading towards that shoreline, because I think going from Muskie, that's going to have our sharpest drop off visually from what I can see so far in the lake. And that was the case. Sometimes it's rare, but you'll go and it drops down and then it levels back out and it's 2 feet for the whole time. Like lakes can have, whatever subterranean structure they want because it's all natural. But there are oftentimes visual indicators you can see from above ground as to what you may be able to experience underwater. So that's one thing, is being able to find drop-offs like that. But even if you're fishing like a very hilly area, we fished some lakes in Algonquin Park, for example, where there are really deep, there's cliffs on these lakes, and there's really deep kind of fingers that stretch off these lakes. And it can be 80, 90 feet deep in these things, and you're only 30 feet off from shore. It's absolutely nuts. And you may not see a big cliff there, but what you will see, it kind of looks like mountains and valleys. And you'll see like a valley, it may be an old river or something that used to run through, or it could just be, the way that the land formed with, pushing rock up out of the ground millions of years ago. But if you can see valleys in the trees and the hills surrounding the lake, even that on a larger scale could show you, hey, the deepest part of the lake may be between those two valleys I'm seeing on either side of the lake. It's probably going to be shallower, where it's more flat trees surrounding the lake. So keep your eye out, not just, on your electronics all the time, because unless you have forward-facing sonar, even that is limited as to how far it can go. I can sometimes, or anyone can look across a lake and say, hey, I see a giant cliff there. I'm pretty sure there's a drop-off over there, but you can see that just with your eyes. So be observant as to the shoreline structure and even like the geography, the overall geography of the area. It can tell you a lot as to where you may want to focus your time.
And I'd say for the most basic part of most fishing in general is finding something that's different. Fish relate to the most random things. Fish will relate to a small patch of sand on a weedy lake, or a small patch of weeds on a sandy lake. So on a small lake like this, there is a lot of weeds, but we were finding that we would catch fish in the deeper clumps of cabbage. And every time we found an area with a deeper clump of cabbage, we knew that there was a high probability that there's a muskie there. And several times today that actually happened. So look for things that are different. Like everyone knows the obvious ones. You see a log falling in the water. That's something different. That's not a normal thing. You go along the whole shoreline, there might be 1 or 2 logs in the water. Those spots are different than the rest of the shoreline. They will probably hold fish. And of course, the log may fall in shallow water and not be very good. And another one will fall in slightly deeper water and be better. So you have to kind of, fish all of them and see if they're worth their time. But look for things that are different. Look for rock piles. Like, remember that rock pile we saw today?
Yeah, it was in this big, if it's one I'm thinking of, it's this big, like, shallow section. And all of a sudden, it looks like, I'm going to pull out another Star Wars reference here. It looks like the Sarlacc pit. Like this weird, like, dark hole full of, like, jagged edges. And it's so odd because you're just seeing mud, sand bottom, the odd, like, weeds around. Like, it was strange to be such shallow water and no weed growth. And all of a sudden, it's this deep hole with, like, rocks around it. It was bizarre. I don't know how that naturally occurred, but hey, it's there.
Yeah, so usually the first day, usually within the first few hours, I know usually if you start fishing like in the early morning, you just want to get out and fish. And generally that's what we do. We're so excited. If we're bass fishing, we'll have a top water tied on and we go out there and with our coffee and maybe a few lures tied on, we'll go out there and just start fishing willy-nilly, so to say, in spots that are obvious. But then throughout the rest of the morning, we're going to be mapping, we're going to be looking around, we're going to be finding spots to go back to. And then when we go back for that second round, that's usually when we clean up because we're like, oh, remember that spot over there? Oh, remember that spot over there? We're compiling all this information that we can use the rest of the trip. And usually that first morning, you do pretty good. But when you go back for the second attack, usually you clean up.
And that's a good point too, because if again, this is a small lake, so it's easy for us to get around and cover water. We're just using the trolling motor on this lake too. We're not going to be using the gas motor. Again, if you're paddling, it's a lot of effort to move around on the water. But if you're fishing a lake, and if you have a multi-day trip there, let's pretend that's I know not everyone can do that, but let's say you have a multi-day trip, you can take the time perhaps to explore a lot the first day. And that's what Jesse and I will do if we have like a 3-day, weekend camping trip. We may not be as productive the first day, like he said, but we'll be taking note of all this stuff. And then we're going to have, our most promising spots. Maybe we didn't fish it well. Maybe we drove right over it and spooked the spot, but we marked it. The next day is when we're going to go back. We're going to start fishing those spots. So that's when we can, just like, in tournaments and stuff like that, they'll often pre-fish. They're trying to find locations that have fish. And then the next day or the next week when they go to the tournament, that's when they're trying to catch those fish. Now, at the same time, for us, we're trying to catch those fish the first day too. It doesn't always work out. But we'll use the information, and that's the biggest takeaway possible is you want as much information as possible, so that you can make the best use of your time. And again, with a multi-day trip, now when we go out after we did that first couple rounds in the lake, Jesse and I were like, okay, we want to hit these 3 weed beds along the side. And we want to move our way over to the river mouth over here. Then we want to hit the base of this island. And we're planning little routes, little destinations on how we're going to attack it, which direction we're going to be. We look at where our shadows are going to be for the time of day, so we can fish each one of those places to the best of our ability to increase our probability of catching a fish there.
And just to add, because this podcast, we're talking about kind of like if you've never gone backcountry fishing, this is kind of, our ramblings on it. But I think one of the main things that I think is great about backcountry is the lakes are small. So like we've been talking about, you may be thinking, oh, I've never done this before. I have to do mapping. I have to do this. I have to have a game plan. You don't have to do that. That's how to be the most successful. But the fact that the lakes are so small, not intimidating, not as intimidating. Some of the bigger lakes, you may not know where the heck to start. And you may fish a weekend and be like, I don't know what the heck happened. Like, I caught a few here and there. These small lakes, though, these backcountry lakes, they're small. They have fish in them. They have tons of fish in them, and they're not intimidating. You can literally cover the whole lake in probably 2 or 3 hours. So it's very doable, even if you have a small canoe. You don't need an expensive boat. You can have a canoe. You can have an inflatable dinghy. You can have a paddleboard. You can fish these small lakes. You can be effective. You can explore. And the cool thing about fishing back lakes too is usually when you're camping right on the lake, you can come in and go out multiple times a day. It's about relaxing too. So like me and Andrew, we're always eager to get out in the morning. bright and early in the morning. Not so much in this time of year, in October or November, because the bite usually isn't that good in the early morning. But the cool thing is when you're back lake fishing is you can go out and fish the prime times only. So say you're bass fishing a back lake, you know you want to be there like legit, the crack of dawn when the sun's just coming up, fishing top water. But then as soon as the sun comes up and it's like 11:30, 12, 1 p.m. and it's super hot outside, go back to your site, have a nap, cook a hot dog, do something else. And then guess what? You feel like fishing again? Go out for a few minutes again, fish a few of your favorite spots, come back in, have dinner, and then go back and do the evening bite. It's great. It's not like a big hassle. It's not like, I got to launch the boat. I got to go in. I got to do that. No, your boat's already in the water right in front of your site, and you just jump in, throw your life jacket on, and start casting. And again, we didn't really talk about this, but me and Andrew brought very minimal fishing gear this trip. I said to Andrew, we know we're musky fishing. Norm told us a little bit about the lake, but generally I didn't really know that much going in about what to expect for the lake. So I said to Andrew, let's just bring 12 baits, 12 musky baits. And honestly, thinking about it now, we could have just brought 6 each and I would have been happy. So me and Andrew brought those 3,700 thick trays, like the deep ones. We filled them with 12 musky baits each. And we've been kind of cycling through them, but we've been mostly catching them on the same type of technique, which is a pull pause because it's so cold. So it has a lot of attraction to the fish as you pull it, but then as you pause, it slowly sinks, and that's when the fish come up and just grab it. So it's been a great trip. You don't have to have a lot of stuff. These lakes are small. They're full of fish. You just have to find them. And you may be wondering, well, how do I find these back lakes? That's a topic for another podcast, but there's lots of information on YouTube and Google, like how to find back lakes, how to get to them. You may think, I don't have an ATV, Norm has ATVs. That's how we got into this lake. But we've been fishing back lakes for years and years and years. We don't have ATVs. You can find these back lakes. A lot of them are in Algonquin Park. That's an easy way to get into it. There's a lot of information as to how to get there. Back lakes are very guarded secrets. Like Norm would kill me if I told you the name of this lake.
Yeah, I would.
He literally would. And that's to be fair. A lot of people think, why don't you like to share? This is a tiny lake. Some people do fish here throughout the year. It has enough pressure as it is for such a small lake. And here's the thing. Ontario has 250,000 lakes. This is just one of them. There's so many more lakes that people can find. Find your own little piece of heaven. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It doesn't take a lot of research to find it. Open Google Maps. Look, find access roads. Do a little bit of adventuring. Have some fun. Guess what? Sometimes you find a lake and it sucks. Sometimes you find a lake, it's amazing, and not many people fish it. So back lake fishing is amazing. We absolutely love it. It's also great for people like us that are just, dirt poor and don't have big bass boats and stuff, because you're fishing these beautiful locations full of fish and you don't need a lot of gear to do it. So that's why I like back lake fishing.
I agree. And even better, if you have a bass boat, you can't get it to these lakes. Ha
suckers!
And even something Jesse said too is they can be easy to find. If you live in Ontario, and if you drive, I'm going to say 2 hours north of Toronto. It sounds like a lot, but if you want to go for a weekend trip and you put a bit of thought into it, hey, I'm going to stay at this base camp here. I'm going to have, I'd say I want to camp near this provincial park. I know I have camping. I know I can camp there. And then you just take little day drives and you drive around and you have a canoe on top of your car or a paddleboard with you, or you just fish from shore. And you just drive down the highway and you look for a little yellow and brown sign that has a boat trailer on it. That means boat launch. And you'll be amazed at how many of those signs you'll see on the highway once you're out of the city. You get up past Haliburton area and, into the Muskoka area, and those signs are all over. And that is public access to small lakes. So if you have the opportunity, I don't know what else we can say to convince you, but even if you aren't, let's say you're not as insane as Jesse and myself, we're here to go fishing. Camping is a side effect. But Norm, what do you think of so far this trip, Norm? Are you enjoying yourself?
I love it. I think this is incredible. And it's, like I mentioned, I wanted to go fishing with you guys and camping, doing this stuff. Again, like Radio Voice Royce loves camping. I'm the same. I love camping. I love fishing. And this was incredible.
And what have you been up to? Kind of alluded to the fact where we've kind of been ditching you on shore because we just had the canoe. But what have you been doing on your with today?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm not going to lie. I'm 55, so I was napping all day.
Honestly, that sounds pretty good because my shoulders are super tight. My back is sore. I'm like, oh man, that nap sounds really good right now.
Yeah, you know what? So I wasn't just napping. The other thing I was doing, I went for a nice hike. As you guys notice, I met you down at the other end of the pond there, discovered some beautiful sights.
All of a sudden, we're fishing, and we see what looks like a Sasquatch yelling at us from amid the trees.
Did you hear me hitting the trees?
It's just
knock,
Norm.
Knock, knock. I'm like, they'll know it's me or a Sasquatch. Either way. But no, I went for a hike, and this is honestly one of the most beautiful areas I've seen in a very long time. So yeah, that's what I was doing, taking a little bit of rest, but really enjoying the nature, especially backcountry camping. You can't beat it. It's not the same as provincial parks.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I agree. There's something special about places like this where it can be a lot of effort, but once you're here, you don't want to go. Like it is, I just look out and I'm like, this is where I feel the most relaxed. So yeah, thank you. A huge thank you to Norm. Big shout out. If you can do yourself a favor and find a friend like Norm to help get you into these back lakes, make use of that. He'll cook for you. He'll set up camp for you. He'll let you sleep in his tent with a nice heater that he provides. It is he'll bring quads for you to drive. It's awesome. He's one in a million though.
I just want to say if Jesse's cold tonight, you're more than welcome to come into the tent with us, buddy.
I'm good.
Jesse doesn't want to hear me snoring, but those are some stories for another time. Before we finish up though, as tradition states, again, we're beautiful location, but we can't let tradition go by the wayside. We're going to have the quote of the week. But before we get to that, I want to give another big thank you. We thanked Norm. That's good. But thank you to all of our Patreon members. Thank you to everyone listening. Your support helps keep this podcast going. We do have even some more giveaways still coming this year, and all of our Patreon members are automatically entered into those giveaways. So be sure if you are wanting to win any of those, make sure you sign up. It's how you're going to be able to win. But a big thank you if you're listening to the show. If you have the opportunity, please give us a rating and please write a review. If it's a fun review, we'd love to read it on the air. On the air like it's a radio show. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to any this episode purely because, again, we have zero signal here, which is fantastic, but it does mean that we can't read out any cool reviews or any of the questions that we oftentimes do on the podcast. But if you do write a review that is funny, interesting, there's a good chance we'll read it on the podcast. And now, as tradition states, we will have the quote of the week handled by Norm.
So before I get into the quote of the week, I just wanted to say something. We talked about camping in a provincial park compared to back lake camping. Provincial parks have areas that are cleaned up by people that work there. But when we're backcountry camping, they don't have that. And the spot that we're at this weekend has been very, very clean, very clean. We have seen a few things that we're going to clean up and we're going to take with us when we head out. But here's my quote of the week. And if you're over 50, you're going to totally get this. Here it is. Give a hoot, don't pollute.